A racist police officer unjustly arrests a black woman, suspecting that her gold necklace doesn't belong to her, without realizing that the woman is the wife of the police chief. From a grave mistake to a tense confrontation, the story reveals the hidden facets of prejudice and an inspiring journey of redemption. Join us as we explore this dramatic journey where justice is restored, courage is tested, and change becomes a beacon of hope. It was a warm afternoon in Greenville, a city known for its vibrant pace, where the streets are always bustling with people. Crowds flocked to shopping malls, parks, and small street cafes, creating a colorful picture of everyday life. The familiar sounds echoed everywhere, the hum of passing cars, the cries of street vendors, and the birds singing in the gentle breeze. Sophia strolled along the cobblestone sidewalk, her confident and graceful demeanor catching the attention of those around her. Her light dress gently hugged her slender figure, accentuating her charm, while the gold necklace sparkling around her neck reflected the sunlight, silently proclaiming the love and appreciation she received from her husband. The necklace was not just a luxurious piece of jewelry, it symbolized the enduring love between her and Michael, her husband, the police chief of Greenville. Michael had given it to her on their 10th wedding anniversary as a reminder that, despite the chaos of the world, he would always stand by her side. Michael was a man respected by everyone. With his seriousness and dedication to his work, he was known as a just and fair police captain, always standing on the side of what was right. Despite the pressures of his job, Michael always found time for his family, especially Sophia, whom he considered the center of his life. At a corner nearby, Ethan leaned against the patrol car, holding a steaming cup of coffee. As a seasoned police officer, Ethan should have been a symbol of experience and maturity in his profession. Instead, he was known for his arrogance and disrespect toward others, especially those he held prejudices against. For Ethan, the police uniform was not just a symbol of responsibility, it was a tool for him to assert his power over others. Rather than building trust and respect, Ethan chose to use oppression to maintain what he called order. As Sophia walked past Ethan, his gaze was immediately drawn to the gold necklace around her neck. But what caught his attention was not the value of the jewelry, it was her confident, composed demeanor. Unlike others who often looked down or avoided eye contact when seeing a police officer, Sophia walked on without glancing at him. Her indifference felt like a challenge to Ethan's ego. He smirked, a mocking smile creeping onto his face. Placing his coffee cup on the hood of the patrol car, Ethan cleared his throat and shouted, "Hey, you!" Sophia paused and turned to look, her face calm but her eyes showing a hint of surprise. "Yes, officer?" she asked, her voice soft yet confident. Her posture silently reminded him that she was not afraid. Ethan moved toward her, his scrutinizing gaze sliding over her appearance, lingering particularly on the necklace. "That necklace," he said, his voice authoritative. "Where did you get it?" Sophia furrowed her brow at the question but kept her composure. "It's a gift from my husband," she replied calmly but clearly. Ethan crossed his arms, his head tilted slightly, his gaze cold. "A gift, huh? Looks expensive. Are you sure it's yours? There's been a jewelry theft recently, and you match the description of the suspect." Sophia stood tall, her expression no longer surprised but firm. "I don't know what incident you're referring to, but I can assure you that this necklace is mine, and I haven't done anything wrong," she said, her tone still polite but sharp. Ethan narrowed his eyes, his doubt and prejudice flaring up. "Sounds familiar, huh? People like you always have an excuse, but we'll sort this out at the station." Sophia took a deep breath. She could feel the injustice in every word Ethan said, but she didn't let herself show any anger. "Officer, I advise you to reconsider before making this decision," she said, her voice low but firm. Sophia stood her ground, her gaze calm and resolute, as Ethan walked closer, his expression smug. "You think you can fool me with some vague story about your husband?" Ethan sneered, gripping the handcuffs tightly. "That necklace doesn't belong to you. Do you think I'm stupid enough not to notice?" Sophia inhaled slightly, maintaining her composure. "Officer, I've been very clear. This is a gift from my husband, and I haven't done anything wrong to deserve this treatment," she replied, her tone soft but unwavering. She knew that getting angry would only give Ethan more reason to abuse his power. Her words only made Ethan more irritated. "A gift sounds nice, but you know people like you always have similar stories. I've heard enough, he said with disdain. Ethan moved in closer, his eyes scanning Sophia from head to toe, as if searching for any excuse to reinforce his prejudice. People like me? Sophia raised an eyebrow, her sharp gaze meeting his. What do you mean by that, officer? A confident black woman walking down the street with a necklace she legally owns? Or anyone who doesn't please you? Sophia's words momentarily threw Ethan off balance, but he quickly masked his loss of control with a smug smile. You're good at arguing, but that doesn't change anything. I'm taking you to the station to sort this out, he said, his tone cutting like an order. Sophia remained calm, but deep inside, she felt the injustice suffocating her. Officer, I don't think you have the right to handcuff and arrest someone without any evidence, she said, her voice firm but still polite. You're overstepping your boundaries. Ethan laughed loudly, the sound full of mockery. Rights? I know my rights, thanks. Now turn around. We'll deal with this at the station. Sophia locked eyes with Ethan for a long moment, as if deciding whether to resist. But she knew that any action other than cooperation could be used against her. She took a deep breath, turned around, and subtly slipped her hand into her coat pocket. Her finger gently pressed the button on her phone, sending a signal that she knew Michael would receive. Ethan quickly slapped the cold handcuffs around Sophia's wrists, as if declaring his victory. All right, get in the car, he ordered, yanking Sophia's arm roughly. Sophia walked, keeping her head held high and her shoulders straight. She felt the eyes of the people around her on her, some curious, others confused, but no one dared to speak out. She got into the patrol car and sat in the back. The cuffs were uncomfortable, but Sophia didn't show any sign of weakness. Ethan sat in the front seat, starting the car with a self-satisfied smirk. I don't know what you think makes you special, but I'm sure the law will make you understand your real place, he said. Sophia, sitting in the back, didn't respond. She gazed out the window, noting every corner of Greenville that she had known for years. In her heart, she knew this was not the end. Sophia wasn't just fighting for herself, she was fighting for everyone who had ever faced injustice and prejudice like she had. As the patrol car drove away, Sophia felt a small sense of relief. She trusted that Michael, always sharp and considerate, would notice the signal from her secret call. She was not alone, and she knew Michael wouldn't let this matter be forgotten. Ethan's patrol car screeched to a halt in front of the police station, its tires emitting a loud, shrill sound. He stepped out with an air of smugness, his eyes scanning his colleagues who were busy inside. Leading Sophia, who maintained her calm demeanor, Ethan marched through the front door as if he had just made a significant arrest. Look what I brought in, Ethan called out, his voice echoing in the bustling police station. A few officers glanced up, their expressions mixed with curiosity and confusion. She was caught wearing a necklace that I'm sure is stolen, a classic case, right? Sophia, although handcuffed, kept her back straight and her head held high. She didn't let Ethan's words affect her composure. Instead, she quietly observed everyone around her, trying to memorize every face and expression. Sensing the scrutinizing stares of some of his colleagues, Ethan added, she didn't even bother to explain properly. People like her think they can fool us easily. Nearby, James, a young officer known for his calm and fair nature, approached. He stopped in front of Ethan, his eyebrows furrowed. Ethan, James said, his voice calm but firm. Are you sure about this? Is there any witness or at least any report that matches her description? Ethan gave a dismissive chuckle and waved his hand, as if not wanting to explain. Of course I'm sure. Don't you see that necklace? Just look at its value, enough to be suspicious. James crossed his arms, his sharp gaze fixed on Ethan. Suspicion is not evidence, Ethan. You can't just rely on gut feeling to accuse someone. What did she do that gave you a reason to arrest her? What did she do? Ethan raised an eyebrow, scoffing. Just that smug attitude is enough. She doesn't look like an innocent person. People like her always know how to hide their true selves, but I'm not fooled. James remained silent for a moment, his gaze shifting to Sophia, who still appeared remarkably composed despite the disadvantageous situation. I think we need to verify things further before making a big deal out of this. It could damage our credibility if we don't have solid evidence. Ethan waved his hand dismissively, uninterested. She'll have a chance to explain herself at the station, he said indifferently, then dragged Sophia toward the holding area. Sophia followed him, her steps steady despite the handcuffs. She remained silent, not arguing or resisting. Inside her mind, a series of thoughts passed by: the injustice, the worry, but above all, the belief that Michael would not let this continue for long. When they reached the holding area, Ethan opened the cell door and motioned for Sophia to enter. "Sit down and think about what you've done," he said, his voice dripping with mockery. "We'll figure out the truth soon enough." Sophia stepped into the cell, where there was only a metal chair and cold, unwelcoming walls surrounding her. But she didn't let the circumstances get to her. She sat down on the chair, her back straight, her gaze directed outward, maintaining an impressive calm. Ethan stood outside, arms crossed, continuing to speak with sarcasm. "You think you're clever, don't you? Those confident words won't do you any good." Sophia looked up, her gaze calm as it met Ethan's. "The truth will speak for itself, officer. I don't need to prove anything to you." Her words were like a slap to Ethan's pride. He turned away and walked back to his desk, continuing to boast to a few colleagues. But in another corner, James was still standing there, his worried eyes fixed on Sophia's holding cell. "There's something wrong here," James muttered. He felt uneasy but lacked the authority to intervene further. He just hoped that someone higher up would step in before things spiraled out of control. Elsewhere in the city, Michael was sitting in his office when his phone buzzed. He looked at the screen and immediately recognized the signal from Sophia. His eyes darkened, a cold shiver running down his spine. Michael stood up, grabbed his police jacket, and walked out of his office without saying a word. He knew something serious was happening, and he wouldn't let anyone abuse their power to hurt the person he loved. Michael entered the police station with the air of a true leader. His shoes lightly clicked against the tile floor, the sound steady in the otherwise hectic atmosphere. But as soon as he appeared, the room seemed to slow down. His colleagues involuntarily stood up straighter, acutely aware of their captain's commanding presence. Captain Michael, an on-duty officer, spoke up, his voice tinged with awkwardness. "We didn't know you were coming today." Michael didn't respond immediately. He swept a cold, assessing glance over the room, taking in the situation. "I received an emergency signal," he said, his voice deep but clear enough for everyone in the room to hear. "I want to know why an innocent woman has been arrested and detained in our station without any valid evidence." The atmosphere in the station suddenly became heavy. The other officers began exchanging glances, their eyes filled with both curiosity and concern. Michael walked straight to the center of the room, where Ethan was standing in the middle of a group of colleagues, recounting the story of Sophia's arrest with a smug expression. "Ethan," Michael called, his voice strong and cutting through the conversation. Ethan turned around, momentarily surprised by the sudden appearance of his captain. "Captain Michael, I didn't know you were here today," he stammered. "Right, and I didn't plan on coming," Michael said coldly. "But I hear my wife, Sophia, is being detained here, and I want to hear the reason directly from you." Ethan froze, his face rapidly shifting from smugness to confusion. "Your wife?" "She's your wife," he stuttered. "Yes, my wife," Michael said, stepping closer, his gaze locked on Ethan. "Can you explain why she was arrested without any legitimate reason?" Ethan took a deep breath, trying to regain his confidence. "Captain, she was wearing a necklace that I thought might be stolen. When I asked about its origin, she couldn't provide clear proof, and her attitude." "Her attitude?" Michael interrupted, his eyes reflecting deep disappointment. "You're telling me you arrested someone just because you didn't like how they reacted to your questions? Is this your understanding of the law, Ethan?" Ethan tried to justify himself, but his words became increasingly disconnected. "She seemed uncooperative, Captain, and that necklace, it looked very expensive, very suspicious." Michael stared directly into Ethan's eyes, his voice low but commanding. "Suspicious? Or did you judge her based on your personal biases?" The room fell silent, the tension almost unbearable. Every officer in the station had their eyes on the two men. Some looked uncomfortable, while others seemed to agree with Michael's interrogation. Michael continued, his tone sharp. I want everyone to hear this. Our job is to uphold justice, not to abuse power to satisfy our egos. If anyone in this team thinks they can act the way Ethan just did, they'll have to answer to me. And I assure you, the consequences will be severe. Ethan lowered his head, his face reddening with embarrassment. I just thought I was doing my duty, he mumbled. Doing your duty? Michael growled. Your duty is to ensure everyone is treated fairly, not to arrest innocent people based on your biases and arrogance. Michael turned back to look at Sophia, who was still sitting calmly in the cell. When their eyes met, he saw her incredible calmness but also the hurt she had endured. He walked to the cell door, his gaze softening. Sophia, he said, his voice gentler now. Are you okay? Sophia stood up, offering a light but meaningful smile. I'm fine, Michael, but I think you need to teach some people here a few lessons. Michael nodded, his eyes filled with determination. He turned back to Ethan, pointing at him. Take the cuffs off her. Now. Ethan awkwardly complied, his hands shaking as he unlocked the cuffs. Michael turned to face the officers in the station, his voice strong and commanding. This is a reminder, there's no room for abuse of power or bias in this team. If any of you forget that, consider this a warning. Once the cuffs were removed, Michael gently took Sophia's hand and led her out of the cell. But before they left, he turned to Ethan one last time. Meet me in my office after your shift, Ethan. This isn't over. As Michael and Sophia walked out of the station, the atmosphere in the room seemed heavy with the weight of Michael's words. The entire police station seemed to fall silent, everyone acutely aware that this was a lesson not just for Ethan but for everyone. After bringing Sophia home, Michael immediately returned to the police station. As he entered the meeting room, all the other officers fell silent, their eyes focused on the captain and the colleague who had just been reprimanded. Ethan, Michael spoke, his deep voice full of authority, causing everyone to stop what they were doing. I've heard enough and witnessed enough. Your actions not only violate professional ethics but also tarnish the reputation of this police force. This is not something we tolerate. Ethan's face turned pale, his eyes showing clear signs of confusion and fear. He tried to speak, but Michael raised his hand to stop him, his cold gaze silencing any defense Ethan might have made. You've used your power to harm an innocent person, Michael continued, his voice as sharp as a blade. You have no evidence to accuse Sophia, yet you decided to arrest her solely based on prejudice and personal arrogance. Not only did you dishonor yourself, but you also dishonored the uniform you wear. Ethan took a deep breath, trying to regain his composure. Captain, I thought I was just doing my duty. Maybe I made a mistake, but... A mistake? Michael interrupted, his eyes burning with intensity. Your mistake is not just a bad decision. It is an abuse of power, a deliberate attempt to target someone you don't understand or respect. This is not something a true police officer should do. Michael stepped closer to Ethan, standing directly in front of him with a stern look in his eyes. You are suspended immediately, Michael declared firmly, his voice echoing through the silent room. Surrender your badge and weapon right now. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. Ethan stood frozen, unable to speak. Losing his badge and weapon meant losing the authority and honor of being a police officer, something he had spent his whole life building. Captain, please don't do this, Ethan pleaded, his voice trembling. I've served here for over 10 years. I don't want to lose everything just because of one mistake. Michael raised an eyebrow, his voice becoming firmer. One mistake? Your mistake didn't just affect Sophia. It tarnished the reputation of this entire team. If you want to make amends, it won't be with words, but with actions. Ethan swallowed hard, his gaze shifting to a pleading one. Please give me another chance. I promise I'll change. I'll prove that I deserve it. Michael stared at Ethan for a long moment, as if weighing his options. But when he spoke, his voice was as cold as ice. If you want a second chance, this is what you need to do: attend 6 months of anti-racism training and psychological therapy. During that time, you will not wear this uniform. If you complete it and prove that you've truly changed, I'll consider allowing you to return. But if not, you will never be allowed back as a police officer." Ethan stood in shock, his hands trembling. He reached up to his chest, slowly removing his police badge and placing it on the table. Then he took his gun from its holster and placed it beside the badge. His eyes were filled with tears, but he fought to hold back the emotion. I'll do whatever it takes," Ethan said, his voice choked with emotion. Michael nodded, but his gaze remained cold. "Good. This is your only chance, Ethan, and I don't want to hear any more excuses. Prove that you deserve this opportunity." Ethan lowered his head, too ashamed to look directly at Michael or anyone else in the room. The air in the station grew heavy, and the other officers stood silently, not daring to speak further. Before leaving, Michael turned back to look at Ethan one last time. "Remember, the next 6 months will determine everything. Don't disappoint me." As Michael left, Ethan stood there, staring at the badge and gun on the table, his hands clenched into fists. Silent tears streamed down his cheeks. At that moment, he realized that everything he had once taken for granted could now vanish. But deep down, he knew that he had to change, not only to save his career but also to atone for all the people he had hurt. Ethan walked into the therapy room on a cold morning, his shoulders heavy with the burden of his past. The small, simple room had a sofa, a desk, and soft light coming through the window. Sitting opposite him was Dr. Patel, a middle-aged woman with sharp yet warm eyes. She looked at him calmly, as if waiting for him to begin his story. Ethan sat down, his hands clasped together, his head bowed as if he couldn't bring himself to meet her gaze. "I don't know where to start," he said softly, his voice hoarse and trembling. "It's okay," Dr. Patel replied gently, her voice soft but clear. "We have time. Start with whatever you feel most comfortable with." Ethan looked up, his eyes filled with exhaustion. "I grew up in a family where everything was divided. My father always had harsh words for others, especially for people who weren't like us. He always said they were lazy and untrustworthy, and I believed him. I thought what he said was true." In the following therapy sessions, Ethan began to dig deeper into his childhood memories. He recalled the nights around the dinner table, where his father would constantly make prejudiced remarks. "You need to be careful around people like them," his father would often say. "They'll take advantage of you whenever they get the chance." Ethan never questioned it. Growing up in such an environment, he accepted these words as truth. When he became a police officer, he carried those thoughts into his work, believing he was administering justice when, in reality, he was just judging and imposing his biases. "Did you ever think those prejudices weren't true?" Dr. Patel asked during one of the sessions. Ethan fell silent, his hands clenched tightly on his knees. "I never thought about it. To me, it was just the way things always were. I didn't question it because I didn't know I could." "So, are you ready to question now?" Dr. Patel continued, her voice gentle but probing. "About your father, about the values he instilled, and how they affect the way you see the world?" Ethan nodded, his eyes heavy. "I can't keep going like this. I've hurt too many people." Not just his family, Ethan realized, but also his workplace, where these biases were reinforced. He remembered the racist jokes his colleagues would often tell, the times they mocked or judged people they deemed unsuitable. Ethan hadn't just listened, he had sometimes participated, thinking it was just part of the team culture. "I was wrong," he admitted in one therapy session. "I thought I was just fitting in, but in reality, I was complicit in something wrong." "So, what will you do to change that?" Dr. Patel asked, her voice encouraging. Ethan didn't answer right away. He knew that change wasn't just about realizing mistakes but also about taking action to fix them. As part of the training program, Ethan participated in practical exercises where he was put into the role of someone experiencing discrimination. In one exercise, Ethan was asked to play the role of a job seeker who was repeatedly turned down for reasons unrelated to his qualifications. The disdainful looks, the cold words, and the indifferent silence he received made him feel the helplessness and hurt firsthand. After the session, Ethan sat in the discussion room, his eyes red. "I didn't think it would feel this bad," he said, his voice trailing off. I always thought I was just doing my job, but now I understand that every little action I take can cause immense harm. The others in the group nodded in agreement. A young officer who was also part of the course shared, "We don't realize how much pain we cause others until we experience it ourselves." Ethan nodded silently, his hands shaking as he remembered how he had treated Sophia. "I didn't just hurt her. I hurt myself, my honor. I don't want to live like this anymore." After weeks of therapy and training, Ethan began to see the world through a different lens. He no longer saw the prejudices he carried as natural. Instead, he began learning how to listen, to understand, and, most importantly, to take responsibility for his actions. But Ethan knew that his journey was just beginning. He would need more time and more effort to prove that he could truly change. And he was determined because he knew that only change would allow him to redeem himself and deserve the opportunity Michael had given him. After weeks of therapy and self-reflection, Ethan walked into a special session of his training course. Today, the participants were encouraged to share their personal stories, the pains they had endured and the biases they had either faced or unintentionally perpetuated. For Ethan, this was a major turning point. He knew the stories he would hear were not just lessons but mirrors reflecting the mistakes he had made. That morning, the participants sat in a circle in a large but simple room. Sandra, a black woman in her 40s, was invited to speak first. She sat upright, her eyes scanning the room before she began. "I've worked hard all my life," Sandra said, her voice deep and strong. "I once applied for a management position at a big company with all the experience and qualifications, but each time I was rejected. They never directly said why, but I knew. I saw it in their eyes, in the way they looked at me, like I wasn't good enough, just because of my skin color." Ethan felt a lump form in his throat as Sandra continued. "I used to wonder if I wasn't good enough, but then I realized the problem wasn't me. The problem was with those who looked down on us just because we were different." After Sandra, Hector, a man of Latin descent in his 30s, began his story. He wore a simple shirt, but his eyes shone with resolve. "My father lived in this country for over 20 years, Hector said, his voice trembling but firm. He worked day and night, paid taxes, and always followed the law. But one day, the police came to our house and deported him as if he were a criminal." Hector paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. "I still remember the look in his eyes when they took him away. It wasn't the look of someone scared, it was the look of someone who had lost all faith in justice. He never came back, and we lost our family forever." Sandra's and Hector's stories hit Ethan like a punch to the heart. He could no longer deny that he had once looked at people like them through the lens of judgment and prejudice. But now, he could feel the pain and helplessness that his actions, and those of people like him, had caused. After the sharing session, the group was invited to discuss. With a heavy heart, Ethan decided to speak up. I don't know what to say," he started, his voice shaking. "Hearing your stories, I feel ashamed. I thought I was just doing my job, but now I realize I never really understood what I was doing." Sandra looked at him, her gaze softening. "Understanding, that's the first step," she said. "But what's more important is that you act to make it right." In the next session, Dr. Patel asked everyone to write a letter to their past selves. A task she called the promise of change. Ethan took the paper and pen, but for the first few minutes, he couldn't write a single word. The emotions inside him were overwhelming, and he didn't know where to begin. Finally, he put pen to paper and wrote the first lines. "Ethan, asterisk. I write this letter to you, the one who thought he was always right. I know you grew up in an environment that taught you there was only one way to see the world, the way your father, your colleagues, and you yourself believed. But I have to tell you, you were wrong, asterisk. You looked at others through the lens of prejudice instead of seeing them as human beings. You used your power not to protect but to hurt. And that didn't just hurt them, it hurt you too, asterisk. I'm not writing this letter to blame you, but to remind you that things can change. You don't have to be who you thought you had to become. You can become a better person, someone others can trust and respect, asterisk. Remember, this journey won't be easy. There will be days you'll want to give up. But remember, every step you take isn't just about fixing your mistakes, it's about building a better future for yourself and for those you've hurt. Asterisk. Commit to change. Commit to doing better. Because if you don't, you'll never be able to look in the mirror without feeling ashamed. Asterisk. From your future self. Asterisk. When Ethan read his letter aloud to the group, his voice caught at several points. His eyes were red, and a few tears rolled down his face. But when he looked up, he saw compassionate eyes from those around him, even Sandra and Hector. That's a big step, Dr. Patel said, offering a slight smile. But your journey isn't over. This is just the beginning. Ethan nodded, a glimmer of hope rising in his chest. He knew this journey would be difficult, but he also knew that he was no longer alone. The stories, the advice, and his repentance had already begun to change him from the inside. At the end of the session, Sandra walked up to Ethan and placed a hand on his shoulder. I believe you can change, she said. But remember, it's a long journey. Ethan smiled faintly, for the first time feeling like he truly could. Because now, he understood that change isn't a destination, it's a path he must walk every day. After 6 long months of challenges and self-reflection, Ethan stepped through the familiar door of the police station. This time, everything felt different. Gone was the smug look and confident stride. Ethan walked in with humility and a deep sense of responsibility. The uniform on his body felt heavier, not because of its weight, but because of the meaning it carried. It was a reminder that he must be worthy of the second chance he had received. Now reinstated as a probationary officer, Ethan entered the office with curious glances from his colleagues. A few greeted him politely, while others silently observed. He understood that trust wasn't something that could be regained overnight. But instead of feeling discouraged, Ethan was determined to prove he had changed. Inside the office, Michael sat behind his desk, his sharp eyes watching Ethan from afar. Michael didn't say anything as Ethan walked past, but his gaze said it all, a mix of sternness and cautious hope. Michael knew Ethan had been on a long journey, but that didn't mean he trusted him completely yet. Ethan sat down at his desk and exhaled deeply. The first day back felt heavier than he had expected. But as soon as he started working, he realized this was his chance to make amends. Not only did Ethan focus on his daily tasks, but he also took the initiative to suggest holding workshops on anti-racism for the new recruits at the station. Initially, the proposal met some skepticism from certain colleagues. Who does he think he is, talking about this? Some whispered. But Michael, who had been quietly observing Ethan all along, decided to give him a chance. In the first workshop, Ethan stood before a group of recruits, holding a notepad. His gaze was steady, though his heart pounded. He began by telling his own story, the mistakes he had made, the prejudices he once held, and the arduous journey to confront himself. I once thought I did nothing wrong, Ethan said, his voice resonating in the quiet room. But the truth is, I hurt a lot of people. I not only failed to protect them, but I also failed to uphold the honor of this uniform. He paused for a moment, looking directly at the recruits. But I've learned that to truly be a police officer, you have to see the humanity in the person on the other side. It's not just their skin color, their circumstances, or their appearance, it's their dignity. Their worth. Each person deserves to have that recognized. Ethan's words weren't just theory, they were lived experiences, lessons he had learned through pain, regret, and relentless effort. Some recruits nodded, while others listened intently. At the end of the session, a young recruit approached him, his eyes bright. Thank you, the recruit said. I think I'll view this job differently because of your story. Ethan felt a sense of relief wash over him, as if his efforts were beginning to have meaning. Michael, who had been watching the entire workshop from the back of the room, kept his sharp gaze as usual. But when Ethan finished, Michael gave a small nod, a subtle yet meaningful sign. After the session, Michael called Ethan into his office. He sat behind his desk, looking at Ethan as if weighing every word. You did well, Michael said briefly, his voice carrying weight. But don't think that one workshop can fix everything. Ethan nodded, keeping his gaze steady. I know, he replied. I'm not expecting everyone to trust me right away. But I'll keep trying every day to show that I've changed. Michael studied Ethan for a long moment, as though searching for some sign in his eyes. Finally, Michael stood up, walked over, and placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "I'll give you a chance, Ethan," Michael said, his voice deeper. "But you have to understand, this chance isn't just for you. It's for the people you've hurt. Don't disappoint me." Ethan lowered his head, his heart full of resolve. "I won't disappoint you," he replied, his voice firm. In the days that followed, Ethan continued his work with a completely different attitude. He spent more time listening to his colleagues, especially those he had once looked down upon. He proactively helped the younger officers, shared his experiences, and wasn't afraid to acknowledge his past mistakes. Michael, though still maintaining some distance, gradually noticed the positive changes in Ethan. Although he didn't express it aloud, Michael felt a glimmer of hope that Ethan was truly on the path to redemption. A few weeks after Ethan returned to the police station, he received an unexpected invitation from Michael. One evening after work, Michael approached him, his expression still serious but a little gentler than usual. "Sophia and I would like to invite you to dinner," Michael said briefly. "Not to celebrate, but to talk." Ethan felt a moment of confusion, but he understood that this wasn't just an ordinary invitation. "Thank you, Captain." "It's an honor," he replied, trying to keep his voice calm despite the nervousness inside. That evening, Ethan stood at the doorstep of Michael and Sophia's house, his heart racing. He couldn't help but wonder if he had done enough to prove he was worthy of trust. With a bouquet in his hand, a small but sincere gesture, he knocked on the door. Sophia answered, offering a light but friendly smile. "Hello, Ethan," she said, her voice warm but meaningful. "Please, come in." The house radiated a cozy warmth, with soft yellow lighting. Ethan stepped inside, feeling a comfort that had been absent from his life for many months. Michael came out of the kitchen, still wearing a simple shirt, nodding and greeting, "Have a seat. Dinner will be ready in a few minutes." Throughout dinner, the atmosphere was initially reserved. Ethan tried to relax but couldn't shake the feeling that he was being tested. Sophia, as usual, maintained a calm demeanor and observed, while Michael asked a few work-related questions. "So, how do you feel about being back at work?" Michael asked, his voice serious but not cold. Ethan put his fork down and straightened up. "Honestly, I feel grateful," he said. "I know not everyone gets a second chance, and I don't want to waste it. Every day, I try to do better to prove I deserve it." Michael nodded slightly but didn't respond. Sophia, sitting beside him, looked at Ethan with a thoughtful gaze. "What have you learned on this journey?" she asked, her voice deep with significance. Ethan took a deep breath. "I've learned that what I thought was right wasn't always right. I grew up with biases I never questioned, and I let them affect how I viewed and treated others. But now, I understand that fairness isn't just about following the law, it's about listening, understanding, and respecting people." Ethan paused for a moment, his eyes meeting Sophia's. "Sophia, I want to say I'm sorry. I'm sorry for what I did to you. I was wrong, and I know this apology won't erase the harm I caused. But I want you to know that I truly regret it and will never let it happen again." Sophia nodded gently, a soft smile appearing on her lips. "Thank you, Ethan. I believe your apology is sincere. But remember, change isn't a moment, it's a journey. You have to work at it every day to maintain that commitment." Ethan nodded, his eyes reflecting determination. "I understand, and I won't stop trying." As dinner neared its end, the atmosphere lightened. Michael and Sophia shared their hopes for the future, not just for themselves, but for the community they served. Ethan listened, feeling their warmth and generosity inspire him. When it was time to leave, Sophia handed Ethan a small notebook. "This is a journal," she said. "Use it to write down what you learn, what you feel, and the times you face challenges. It will be a way for you to reflect on your journey." Ethan took the journal, his heart full of gratitude. "Thank you. I will do that." Michael stepped forward, giving Ethan a gentle pat on the shoulder. "Keep doing well, Ethan. You've come a long way, but there's still work to be done. And we'll be here to make sure you don't lose your way." Ethan bowed his head, his voice trembling slightly.
I won't disappoint you." As Ethan left Michael and Sophia's home, he felt a sense of relief he hadn't felt before.
The dinner wasn't just an opportunity for reconciliation, it was a reminder that real change required constant effort. He knew the road ahead was long, but with Michael and Sophia's guidance, he believed he could continue to stay on the right path. After the healing dinner at Michael and Sophia's house, Ethan felt like he had crossed an important milestone in his journey of self-transformation. But he knew this was only the beginning. Armed with the experiences and lessons he had learned, he was determined to do more, not only to atone for his past, but also to contribute positively to the community he had once hurt. Ethan began actively participating in community events. At a seminar on diversity and inclusion held at the local community center, Ethan stood before a packed room in his police uniform. He no longer exuded the arrogance he once had. Instead, there was humility and sincerity in his demeanor. "I used to stand in the position of someone who didn't understand," Ethan began, his voice clear and steady. "I didn't understand that small actions and biases could leave deep scars on others. But through my mistakes, I've learned that true change starts with listening." He shared his journey, from confronting his past in therapy sessions to his experiences in training. His stories, especially the moments when he had to face the pain he had caused, deeply resonated with the audience. Sandra and Hector, who had met Ethan during the training program, were also present at the event. As Ethan finished his speech, they took the stage to speak about the positive impact Ethan's change had made. "We need more people like Ethan," Sandra said. "Not perfect people, but those who are willing to admit their mistakes and work to correct them." Hector added, "Ethan hasn't just changed himself, he's inspired us to believe that change is possible, even when the journey is tough." Ethan listened to them, feeling a warmth spread in his chest. He knew their recognition wasn't just a compliment, it was the motivation he needed to keep striving. Not only in the community, but Ethan also began making a positive impact at the police station. At first, some colleagues remained distant, skeptical that his change was genuine. But over time, Ethan's small actions started to change how they viewed him. During a shift, a young colleague named Kevin approached Ethan for advice on handling a tough situation involving an immigrant family. "I think you'd understand this situation better than anyone," Kevin said, his voice hesitant but sincere. Ethan smiled, sensing that his efforts were being noticed. He took the time to guide Kevin, emphasizing the importance of empathy and approaching the situation fairly and sensitively. Before long, Ethan was asked to lead an internal training program on diversity and inclusion for the entire police station. This was a significant step, not only for him personally, but for the entire team. During the training, Ethan didn't hesitate to admit his past mistakes, using his own story as a lesson for his colleagues. "We can't change the past," Ethan said during the training. "But we can learn from it to do better. I made mistakes, and I stand here today not to hide them but to ensure we don't repeat them." Gradually, his colleagues' attitudes toward him began to shift. They no longer saw him as a failure trying to redeem himself, but as someone who had learned and was striving to do what was right. Some, like James, who had confronted Ethan during Sophia's arrest, even started to respect him. "I didn't think you could change this much," James admitted during a conversation. "But you've proved me wrong, and I'm glad you did." Ethan's presence at the police station didn't just change attitudes, it also transformed the work culture. Colleagues started paying more attention to how they interacted with the community. Discussions on diversity and inclusion, once mere formalities, now became more substantive, with active participation from everyone. In the community, Ethan's regular appearances at events and seminars helped rebuild trust. Those who had once felt abandoned by the police began to see that there were people within the force who genuinely cared about them. Michael, though always maintaining a professional distance, silently observed Ethan's progress. One day, after Ethan completed an internal training session, Michael entered his office. "Ethan," Michael said, his voice stern but with warmth. "I have to admit, I didn't think you could go this far. But you've proven that you deserve this opportunity. And more importantly, you've made this team better." Ethan looked up, his eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you, Captain," he replied, his voice steady but firm. "I won't stop here." Michael nodded, a rare smile briefly appearing on his face. "I know," he said. And I hope you continue to lead positive changes, not only here, but also in the community we serve. Ethan lowered his head, feeling a sense of relief he had never felt before. He knew his journey was far from over, but with each passing day, he was getting closer to becoming the person he had always wanted to be, a police officer who not only enforces the law but also protects the dignity of every person. As time passed, Ethan's efforts were not only recognized within the police department but also reached the wider community. Stories of his transformation from a biased officer to a strong advocate for justice and inclusion became an inspiration to many. One day, Ethan received a notification that he would be awarded a prestigious honor for his positive contributions to the community. The award ceremony took place in a large hall, gathering local leaders, community representatives, and Ethan's colleagues. On stage, the host introduced Ethan's journey. "We are here today to honor someone who has proven that change is not only possible but necessary," the host said. Ethan has overcome past mistakes, learned from them, and used those lessons to create positive change in his community and with his colleagues. Ethan stepped onto the stage amidst loud applause. He wore his police uniform, but this time, he carried a different demeanor, not of arrogance, but of humility and gratitude. From the stage, his eyes scanned the audience and paused on Michael and Sophia, who smiled proudly. "Thank you, everyone," Ethan began, his voice resonating clearly through the hall. "I stand here today not because I'm perfect, but because I've made mistakes, big mistakes. But I've been fortunate to be given a chance to make things right, a chance that I know not everyone gets." He paused for a moment, taking a deep breath before continuing. "When I started this journey, I wasn't sure I could change. But day by day, with the guidance of people like Michael and Sophia, I've come to realize that change doesn't come from big moments, it comes from small actions every single day." Ethan looked around the hall, his gaze full of sincerity. "I've learned that none of us are perfect, but we can all strive to be better. Day by day. I also realize that my journey isn't over, it will never be over. I will keep learning, keep listening, and keep working to become a better version of myself." He lowered his head, his eyes misty. "This award is not just recognition for what I've done, it's a reminder that I still have a lot of work ahead of me. And I am committed to continuing my efforts, not just for myself, but for the people I have the privilege of serving." As Ethan left the stage, applause erupted again. Sophia stood up, her eyes shining with pride. Michael, standing next to her, gave a small nod, as if to acknowledge Ethan's achievement. Though always serious, Michael couldn't hide a satisfied smile that briefly appeared on his face. After the ceremony, Ethan stood with Michael and Sophia in the waiting area. "You did well," Michael said lightly, patting Ethan on the shoulder. "But you're right, this journey never ends. And we'll be here to make sure you stay on track." Sophia smiled, placing her hand on Ethan's arm. "Ethan, today you proved that no one is beyond change. But remember, real change comes from maintaining it every day." Ethan nodded, his eyes shining with determination. "I understand, and I promise I will never stop trying." As they stepped out of the hall, Ethan felt a sense of relief and hope. He knew the road ahead was still long, but he also knew he wasn't alone. With Michael's guidance, Sophia's forgiveness, and the community's trust, Ethan was ready to continue his journey, not to become perfect, but to keep learning and giving. The award ceremony ended, but Ethan's story didn't stop there. His journey became a powerful catalyst, not just for himself, but for the entire Greenville community. His efforts helped rebuild trust and paved the way for profound changes in how the police department operated and interacted with the community. Ethan's transformation story spread widely, becoming an inspiration throughout Greenville. People who had once held negative views about the police now began to feel hopeful. Nonprofit organizations and local activist groups started to collaborate more closely with the police department, organizing discussions and workshops to enhance understanding and strengthen ties between law enforcement and the community. Events like Community Listening Day, organized by Ethan and his colleagues, attracted hundreds of participants. People had the opportunity to share their experiences, concerns, and expectations about the police. Ethan often led these discussions with sincerity and humility, encouraging openness. "We're not here to protect our reputation," Ethan said during one discussion. "We're here to learn from you, to better understand what we need to do to serve you better." Thanks to these efforts, Greenville slowly became a model for other areas looking to reform their police forces. Local newspapers praised the Greenville Police Department not only for its improvements but also for continuously finding ways to build trust with the public. Michael, from his position as captain, not only observed but actively participated in the reform process. One day, in his office, Michael invited Ethan to discuss plans. He stood before a planning board full of notes outlining proposals for expanding training programs and strengthening community connections. "Ethan," Michael said, his gaze sharp but full of hope. "You've done things no one thought possible. But I believe your journey can go even further." Ethan, sitting across from him, tilted his head, listening intently. "What do you mean, Captain?" Michael pointed to one of the notes on the board. "We need to build an internal mentoring system where officers are trained not just in skills but in empathy, fairness, and accountability. I want you to lead this program." Ethan's eyes widened in surprise. "You think I'm capable of that?" he asked, his voice tinged with hesitation. Michael nodded, a smile briefly appearing on his lips. "No one understands the change needed better than you. You're not just a living example, you're someone who has proven change is possible. If anyone can guide young officers in understanding the values of justice and compassion, it's you." Ethan paused to think for a moment, then looked up, his eyes shining with determination. "I'm ready. But I want this program not just to focus on the police, I want it to connect the whole community, where people can learn from each other." Michael smiled, nodding in agreement. "That's the vision I hope for." In the months that followed, Ethan led the mentoring program with support from Michael and his colleagues. He not only taught but also organized open discussions where both police officers and residents could share their views. This interaction not only helped build trust but also created concrete solutions to real-world issues. The Greenville Police Department, once a symbol of separation, had now become a center for unity and understanding. Ethan, in his new role, not only led but also learned from those around him. He understood that change was never one-sided, it always required cooperation and dedication from everyone. One day, during a large workshop, Ethan stood before an audience of both police officers and residents. "I once thought change was impossible," he said. "But through my journey, I've come to realize that change isn't a destination, it's a path. And we, all of us, are responsible for keeping that path wide open." As he finished, applause filled the room. Among the crowd, Michael and Sophia smiled, their eyes full of pride. They knew Ethan hadn't just changed himself, he had helped change an entire community. With his new role, Ethan looked to the future, confident that his journey in Greenville's was only just beginning. And he was ready to continue. For now, he wasn't working just to atone, but to build a fairer world for everyone. Ethan's work in Greenville became a cornerstone of community police relations, setting an example for other cities and police departments across the country. As the mentoring program expanded, it became more than just a training initiative, it evolved into a movement that emphasized mutual respect, accountability, and shared humanity. Ethan often reflected on his journey, particularly on how much he had learned from others. Sandra and Hector remained close allies, frequently joining him and speaking at community events and advocating for broader reforms. Together, they shared a powerful message that the path to justice required effort and cooperation from everyone, regardless of their past. 1 year after Ethan's reinstatement, Greenville hosted its first-ever Community Unity Summit, bringing together local leaders, law enforcement, activists, and residents. Ethan was a keynote speaker, and his address was a testament to how far he had come. Standing at the podium, he spoke with a calm confidence that resonated throughout the hall. "I stand here today not as someone who has all the answers, but as someone who has learned the importance of asking the right questions," Ethan began. "What kind of community do we want to build? What kind of future do we want for our children? And most importantly, what steps can each of us take to make those goals a reality?" He paused, looking across the audience. "I've learned that real change is slow and challenging. It requires humility, listening, and a willingness to admit when we're wrong. But I've also learned that change is worth it, because every step forward makes a difference." Ethan concluded his speech with a call to action: let us not just talk about justice, let us embody it.
Let us not just imagine a better future, let us create it, together.
The audience rose to their feet, giving him a standing ovation. Among the crowd, Michael and Sophia once again stood with quiet pride, knowing how much Ethan's transformation symbolized hope for many.
Over time, Ethan's initiatives inspired other departments to adopt similar programs. Law enforcement leaders from neighboring cities visited Greenville to learn from its success.
Ethan was often invited to consult on strategies for improving police-community relations, and his story became a case study in professional ethics and personal accountability.
Back in Greenville, the changes were evident.
Trust between the police and the community grew stronger with each passing day. Incidents of racial bias were met with swift action, thanks to the systems of accountability that had been implemented. Residents felt empowered to voice their concerns, knowing their input would be valued.
Ethan continued his work with a relentless dedication. He spent countless hours mentoring new officers, ensuring they understood not just the technical aspects of their job but also the moral responsibility it carried. He often reminded them, every decision you make impacts someone's life. Never forget that.
One day, during a routine shift, Ethan was approached by a young woman in her early 20s. She hesitated before speaking, but eventually said, "Officer Ethan, I just wanted to thank you."
Ethan raised an eyebrow, curious. "Thank me? For what?"
The woman smiled nervously.
"I was in a rough place a couple of years ago. I'd been unfairly treated by law enforcement, and I lost all trust in the police. But then I heard about what you did, how you turned things around. It gave me hope that not all officers were the same, and that people can change. That hope helped me rebuild my life."
Ethan was momentarily speechless.
"Thank you for telling me that," he finally said, his voice filled with emotion. "It means more than you know."
The woman nodded and walked away, leaving Ethan with a renewed sense of purpose. Moments like these reminded him why he had committed to his journey in the first place.
As the years went by, Greenville continued to thrive as a model of collaboration and mutual respect. Ethan's efforts became a legacy that shaped the culture of the police department and the community at large. Michael eventually retired, leaving behind a department transformed under his leadership.
Before stepping down, he had one final conversation with Ethan.
"You've done well, Ethan," Michael said, his voice steady but warm. "I couldn't have asked for a better person to carry this mission forward.
Just remember, the work never ends."
Ethan nodded, his expression serious. "I'll keep at it, Captain. I won't let you or this community down."
As Michael left his office for the last time, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment.
He knew the department was in good hands. In his later years, Ethan became a prominent advocate for systemic change in policing nationwide. He spoke at universities, community forums, and even congressional hearings, sharing his story and urging others to take action against prejudice and abuse of power. But despite his growing influence, Ethan remained deeply connected to Greenville. He never forgot where his journey began or the people who had helped him along the way. Sophia's advice to him, that change was a daily commitment, stayed with him as a guiding principle. One evening, as the sun set over Greenville, Ethan stood at the edge of a park where a group of children were playing. Their laughter filled the air, a reminder of the hope and potential that lay in the future. He smiled to himself, feeling a quiet sense of accomplishment. He knew his journey would never truly end. There would always be new challenges, new lessons, and new opportunities to grow. But Ethan was ready to face them all, armed with the knowledge that even the smallest actions could make a difference.